In this video, we will look at some color concepts that will be helpful as we design. So first of all, we have to have a certain common language to discuss color. And it's not very easy. For example, when we define space, we have length, width, and height. And that information gives us some idea of what that space contains. We have a similar way to describe color: hue, value, and chroma. And this is the order in which you want to define color. So what is hue? Hue is the name of the color. When you look at a color, is it a red? Is it a blue? Is it a green? What basically is it? Then the value is whether it is light or dark. If it's got low value, it's a darkish color. If it's a high value, it's very light. And the value scale are grays. If you squint your eyes just a little bit, you can see the gray scale a lot better in a color. The hue becomes less pronounced. Finally, chroma. Chroma is saturation. How strong is the color? A strong color is bright and intense, and a weak color is kind of dull and grayish. Gray is one of those colors that possess neither chroma nor hue. It is only value. These two concepts can be put together and create a virtual globe where the axis of the globe goes from light to dark. That's the value scale. And then around the equator, the colors go from weak to strong, and that is the chroma scale. Primary colors are those colors that cannot be reproduced by mixing. In our colorant color wheel, that's red, blue, and yellow. Secondary colors are made by equal parts of primary colors. So equal part of red and equal part of yellow will create a secondary orange. Equal part of yellow and blue, green, and blue and red, violet. And tertiary colors are created by mixing equal parts of a secondary and a primary. And the name of the color is where they came from. So example, red-orange came from mixing red and orange. Blue-green from blue and green. Beyond that are considered complex colors, and they're typically not shown on a wheel. Almost all colors can be traced back to those 12 colors on the wheel. And so the first thing you need to look at when you look at a color, you ask yourself, well, what color family? What's the hue? And then after you see the hue, verify the value and the chroma. So these three are all in the yellow-green family. They're all yellow-green colors. And then once we know where they are in the color wheel, we can make some color associations. Let's look at some basic schemes. One of the simpler schemes is a hue with a neutral. And in these schemes, grays or color may dominate. It depends. This is an example of one such scheme. Usually you use a hue and a neutral in place where colors is not as important piece. For example, a site plan, perhaps a wall section, something of that nature, where you don't need to have specific colors shown, but you want to show some differentiation of the different parts. Monochromatic is also a very common scheme in that we take one color and then work with the values of that color. And it's usually very restful. Monochromatic is a very restful type of scheme. To get interest, though, that restful scheme needs to have contrast in value or chroma or variation. In this example, when one side goes from light to dark, then one goes from dark to light. The interplay between the two makes it interesting. Here's another example of a monochromatic scheme. Very restful, and the colors work well together. Analogous schemes are colors side by side on the wheel. It works the best when they are definitely warm or definitely cool. The interest in it depends on the variation of intensity or value. Analogous schemes also tend to be very common and popular to do. Here's an example of an analogous scheme. We have yellow, orange, and red, and then grays in the background so the building stands out. Here's an interesting image showing the analogous idea with progression as well. So the building at this end is green. The building at this end tends to be this purpley red. And the progression goes across that streetscape. It could be a very interesting streetscape. This building works well with this one because they are analogous. This one works with this one because they are analogous, and so forth. So each building side by side becomes analogous. A couple of analogous schemes here. We also have ceilings and floors that come into play. They are surfaces that have color and can affect the room. Here's a blue-violet scheme. Yellow-orange and orange scheme. Complementary. These colors tend to be dramatic and vigorous. When using complementary colors, take care not to use strong chroma because that can create a very strong effect. In this one, that green and that red really are fighting for your attention. On the right example, they were both toned down. The chroma's been toned down and some of the value was moderated so that these pairs of colors work better together. This example shows a couple of successful complementary schemes. Notice how the violet in the left example is lightened up quite a bit. This is showing color balance. By lightening the violet, it doesn't overwhelm the yellow. In the right example, the chroma of the blue has been toned down so much it's almost a gray. If the chroma of the blue was as strong as the orange, the room would have been overwhelming. Split complementary is another way of having some sort of tension between the colors, some sort of dynamics between the colors, but instead of being directly across and straight across, which will give us the most dynamic element, we go to the side, and that kind of gives us some interest without having that jarring sensation. Here's an example of violet, orange, and green. Double complementaries are interesting in that you choose a color and its opposite, but then also it's adjacent. So in this case, the opposite of this color is this one, the yellow, green, and the red, violet. And then this one, the yellow, orange, and the blue, violet, kind of go back, are opposite from each other, but they are adjacent to each other as well. There's kind of a dual mode. It creates a very complex situation, and it could get a little bit too much. So in this scheme here, we see orange, blue, green, and red all together. And you can see right now there's quite a bit of dynamism going on here. There's a lot of things going on. Your eyes are moving a lot throughout it. It's a very active space. On the other side, the bedroom, the same thing too. There's a lot of color, a lot of play, a lot of texture. That also creates a lot of dynamics. Sometimes in this kind of color scheme, it's better if you use a 60-30-10 rule so that the largest area, which tend to be the walls, account for 60% of a room's color. And that's going to be like the biggest color factor, followed by window treatments and upholstery, which is about 30% more, and the accessories 10% more. This is a good way to balance all these out. Finally, a triadic scheme is from hues that are equidistant from each other. And one of the most common triadic schemes is yellow, blue, and red. Here are two examples of triadic schemes. They both use violet, orange, and green, the secondary colors. In both, the chroma of the violet has been weakened to better work with the other colors. In the left scheme, the green has also been lightened so the room has color balance. In the right, however, you can see how the green dominates the room since its chroma is pretty intense. That was the desired effect for this space. The wall was to be a focal point. However, additional elements of black are sprinkled throughout to help balance the room. Finally, what we call many-hued schemes. In this scheme, we want to repeat a pattern or an element so the room does not become too cluttered. This is a product you have probably seen in art supply stores. It is a disc with a pin in the middle that lets the middle portion rotate. On both sides, we can see the color wheel. One side shows color associations, and the other side shows color mixing. There's some places online, this colorschemedesigner.com, although it's made for web design, can certainly work for other things as well. And you can decide what kind of schemes you're looking for, and they'll show you color combinations that could work together. And you can see whether or not you like the effect of the choices you've made. Another color source is color.adobe.com. This one you show the color wheel you're looking for. I click on the circles down here, and they'll show you where on the wheel it is. And this also gives you the RGB of the color, which is good. A good suggestion when you work in a space is to paint an area, maybe about 5 feet by 5 feet. Get a small batch of color and test an area and see what it looks like. Look at it in direct sunlight. Look at it in indirect sunlight. Look at it artificial light. And compare that to color chip. Larger areas of color will appear darker than what's on a chip, and colors are affected by those around them as well. It is amazing how much adjacent color can affect our perception. In this example, from the archimedeslab.org, these almond-shaped lozenges are all the same color. The reason they look so different is because of the adjacent color. When putting a band of color through them to negate the adjacent color effect, it is obvious that the lozenges are all the same color. When you start deciding which colors to use, consider the mood you want expressed. Is it warm and cozy, rich and refined? Is it verdant or cool? Then use the information in this presentation to select colors that will work well together and express this design intent.